all party meetings for the Fresno River pending petition for statutory adjudication. First of all, we wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to attend today's meeting. The meeting today is being recorded, both audio and video, and the recording will be made available on the project website. I'm going to be turning my video off momentarily just because I sometimes have bandwidth issues. There's also no need, you don't have to share your video though, as we open up the floor to the parties later, we would love to see you. Okay, so the goal for this meeting is really twofold. One, we wanted to provide you with an update of where we are and what the next steps are for this project, and discuss the parties' opportunity to participate in the board process. The second objective is to allow for questions and to hear from you, the parties, directly if you have any initial thoughts or comments on the preliminary staff recommendation. As you know, while board staff completed the desktop investigation and geodatabase and engaged in some of the plenary meetings, we did not really participate in the negotiations and have had little to no direct interaction with the parties. The discussion today will further inform staff recommendation and briefings we have scheduled with our board members in the upcoming weeks. An agenda was issued via email yesterday, and we have that up on the screen in case you do not have it handy. First, I would like to introduce the State Water Board team on the call today. Again, my name is Connie Mitterhofer. I oversee the hearings and special projects section, and this project was assigned to the section approximately 2 years ago. Eric Ekdahl, our deputy director, unfortunately could not make it today, and he's sending his apologies. So with me today, I have Michael Buckman, senior environmental scientist who manages the hearings unit. And working for Michael are Jesse Jankowski and Lisa Hong, who I believe most of you know as they have participated in a few of the meetings. Both Jesse and Lisa are water resource control engineers who have done much of the work on the desktop investigation and geodatabase and really the heavy lift on the project. And finally, we also have Amanda Pearson from our Office of Chief Counsel. Rather than doing a party-by-party introduction, we propose that you identify yourself when you speak. So next on the agenda are the meeting logistics and ground rules. We wanted to make sure that the meeting runs as smoothly as possible. As you know, with online meetings, there can be inherent challenges. So again, both the audio and video for this meeting are being recorded on the Zoom platform, and the recording will be made available through our Fresno River project website. If possible, we would like to ask that you participate from a quiet environment and speak slowly and clearly so that we can properly hear you. Also, it's really important to avoid creating acoustic feedback. Therefore, please remain on mute while others are speaking to minimize background noise and interruptions. We would like to hold questions until the end, as we may address some of the questions when we go through the agenda items today. If you have a question or would like to provide a comment or thought, we propose that you use the raised hand feature in Zoom, and we will then call on you. This hopefully will avoid numerous folks talking at the same time. If you're participating by phone, we will take your questions and comments at the end. We did not want this meeting to be too rigid, but we're hoping that some of these ground rules and logistics will help ensure that the meeting runs smoothly. I also wanted to mention that we're not going to be able to address or go into detail on anyone's specific water rights today. Finally, we really appreciate your cooperation and patience. We have done a few of these meetings on Zoom, but there are usually some logistical or technical issues coming up. And so if they do, we will work to try to resolve them as quickly as possible. I'm going to be turning the discussion over to Jesse Jankowski, who will provide some background on the petition, the board resolution that was adopted in 2019 and the work that has been completed, including the negotiations that have taken place since then.
Thank you very much, Connie, and thank you everybody for being here with us today. I'm gonna stay off video, but hopefully everybody remembers what I look like. So I'm gonna go through a little bit of the background and history of this project, at least from the perspective of the State Water Board and specific to the petition for statutory adjudication. So that petition was received in October of 2018. And following the submission of that petition, the State Water Board did some kind of preliminary investigations and conducted outreach to a number of folks who are on the call today, as well as several agencies to the Madera Irrigation District and various other landowners and water right claimants in the Fresno River watershed. We also did mail out a series of letters. This was back in late 2019 to known water right holders throughout the Fresno River watershed, not just folks located in the lower basin. And finally, the State Water Board staff prepared a recommendation to the board that was held before the board at its September 2019 board meeting. And at that meeting, the State Water Board adopted the staff recommendation and adopted a resolution. That final resolution is 2019-0049. And what that resolution did is it left the petition for statutory adjudication of the Fresno River watershed pending before the board. And it allowed parties, specifically parties in the lower Fresno River watershed below Hidden Dam, where the most conflict over water use and water rights are being experienced. It allowed them 8 months to negotiate an alternative settlement and a management framework which would both resolve these issues and these conflicts, which were expressed in Madera Irrigation District's petition, as well as to avoid the need for a comprehensive statutory adjudication of the entire watershed. So the parties were given 8 months, that was until about May 2020, to conduct these negotiations. And in the board's resolution, a number of milestones and requirements were specified, specifically 8 requirements and 7 milestones. So those requirements were required elements of an eventual settlement that it would have to meet in order to be successful from the board's perspective, as well as this series of milestones that the board and the board staff would use to assess progress toward that successful settlement, specifically if parties were requesting more time for negotiations. One part of the board's resolution was directing State Water Board staff to investigate the possibility of funding a professional facilitator to aid Fresno River parties in their negotiations. And the board staff did that, and Kearns & West, a professional facilitation and mediation firm, was hired. And I know many folks on this call participated in negotiations with Kearns & West. That was stretching from about November 2019 until just earlier in August 2020, when Kearns & West submitted its final report to the board. We can talk a little bit more about that final report in a minute. But in the interim, while parties were negotiating, as directed in the board's resolution, State Water Board staff also conducted a preliminary desktop investigation of water rights to the lower Fresno River, again, the main stem of the river from Hidden Dam to the confluence with the San Joaquin River. And the purpose of this investigation was to provide a consistent set of publicly available information that would help aid parties in their negotiations, but it was not a definitive determination of water rights. This was just kind of a best guess using public water right and land ownership information. So the board published that investigation in December 2019. That's also available on the project website. That was provided in email to all of you yesterday afternoon. And that was basically a series of tables and a series of maps showing possible lands with possible riparian water right claims, as well as the places of use and diversion points for licensed water rights on the river. As a follow-up to that investigation, in July 2020, State Water Board staff also released the Fresno River Investigation Geodatabase, which is essentially a web-based map and interactive platform for viewing those investigation results in an interactive online format rather than a series of static tables and maps. So around May 2020, when parties were initially supposed to return before the State Water Board, this is 8 months after the September resolution, the State Water Board granted an extension, and this was partially due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, but also with the hope that parties could utilize additional negotiation time to produce a successful settlement. So the board granted parties an additional 5 months and stated that they had until around October 2020 to continue their negotiations. So Connie will talk in just a minute about the plans for the October board meeting. But I did want to address, so as part of its contract, the conclusion of its contract with the State Water Board, Kearns and West issued a final report on mediation to the State Water Board. That was August 7th. And we are working on posting that, that report online for everyone to view. But the final report on mediation offered kind of a check-in on those criteria and milestones that the board had required in its September 2019 resolution. And that offered some perspective from all different parties that had been participating in negotiations, which State Water Board staff relied on to develop its current recommendation before the board. We're also conducting this type of outreach today with parties and interested persons in the Fresno watershed, and we hope that we have a chance to hear from you and further develop our recommendation before the board. So with that, I will pass it back to Connie to discuss staff's plans for the upcoming board meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. So we are targeting the second October board meeting, which would be October 20th, to bring this project back to the board for consideration. That board meeting would be the meeting where parties would provide an update if they wish, and staff would give their preliminary recommendation to the board. And I'm going to tackle agenda items 4 and 5 together because they do go together. So staff is cognizant and very much appreciates the hard work that parties have invested in this process. We feel that a lot of progress has been made, but ultimately not all of the 8 criteria and 7 milestones that the board laid out in its resolution were met. There does appear to be a recurrent theme of needing State Water Board involvement in the process for it to be successful, and staff believes that a statutory adjudication is the most appropriate pathway forward. Therefore, the preliminary staff recommendation is for the board to grant the petition and move forward with the adjudication. Please note, this is really a preliminary staff recommendation. The ultimate decision does lay with the board, and the parties have an opportunity to participate in the board process, as we will discuss a little later. I also wanted to note that a statutory adjudication does not necessarily forgo the parties continuing their negotiated settlement discussions, with which could be rolled into the process, potentially saving both time and money. So as part of the board meeting, and most of you might be familiar with this, but the board issues an agenda. The agenda will be issued at least 10 days in advance, so that would be October 10th. That agenda will provide links to the staff reports and recommendations. In this case, there would be what's called an agenda item, which is a brief description of the project, a resolution that the board would act on, and a more detailed staff report. The other part that I wanted to mention is if the board were to grant the petition at the October 20th board meeting, ex parte provisions would go into effect, and we will very likely not be able to discuss any controversial or substantive issues with the parties individually after that date. I'm going to hand the discussion over to Amanda, who's going to provide a brief overview of the statutory adjudication process and the potential for continued negotiations if the board were to grant the petition.
Hi, everyone. This will be a fairly general overview. There is more detail regarding the adjudication process in the fact sheet that is on the project webpage. If the board grants the petition, the first thing that would happen is a fairly extensive noticing period. There would be published, mailed, and recorded notices. Once the noticing is complete, staff would begin field investigations of existing water uses and diversions. And it would also receive proofs of claim from the various water users. It would use the proofs of claim and the information it collects from the field investigations to prepare a report of investigation and a preliminary order of determination of the water rights to the Fresno River. Once that report and preliminary order go out, there will be an opportunity for interested parties to submit objections to the report and preliminary order to the board. The board would hold hearings on any objections it receives, and after those hearings are complete, it would issue a final order. There would be a reconsideration period for that final order, and when that reconsideration period closes, the order would be filed with the Superior Court. The court would take challenges to the final order. The Water Code calls those challenges exceptions. Once the court hearings on the exceptions are complete, the court would issue a final water rights decree. That would be similar to the other existing water rights decrees that have come out of other statutory adjudications. To give you a very general idea of the timing here, for the most recent statutory adjudication the board completed, which was the San Gregorio Creek adjudication, the investigation started in 1980 and the court issued its decree in 1993, so about 13 years in there. Connie already mentioned this, but we don't intend the staff recommendation to move forward with the adjudication to stop or foreclose any further negotiations amongst the parties. But we do think that there is a need for a firmer board role, and the adjudication gives us the process to step in. Staff would be prepared to consider the product of any continued negotiations that might result.
All right. Are we on agenda item 8?
Yes.
Thank you, Amanda. So we also wanted to discuss a little bit more the options for getting involved, either prior to or at the board meeting. So there are really 2 ways by which to address the board: in writing and then also in person during the board meeting. For written comments on the board item, there is a strict 10-day public comment period associated with those board items, and the agenda that the clerk of the board issues 10 days in advance will spell out those deadlines. Parties can certainly submit comments in advance of the agenda being issued if they wish to address the board members in writing. And again, we're hoping to get some of your thoughts and initial feedback today, if you have any. Then given COVID and the social distancing requirements, the October board meeting will likely be held on the Zoom platform. The parties may address the board individually or organize themselves in a panel, which may be the more efficient way to go. And if you were to look back at last September's board meeting, that's how the item was handled back then. If you wish to organize as a panel, please coordinate with staff so that we can assist you with the logistics in advance of the board meeting. Because the board typically has a full agenda, there will likely be time limits associated with any presentation, be it individual or as a panel. Also, the board's website has very detailed instructions for participating in State Water Board meetings, including, again, the deadlines for submitting comment letters, deadlines for PowerPoint presentations. We're doing virtual speaker cards now, and all of that has to be coordinated with the clerk of the board in advance. So at this point, we would, I don't know if anybody on the team, Michael, Jesse, Lisa, Amanda, have anything to add before we dive into agenda item number 9, where we open up the floor to the parties for questions, discussions, initial thought, and feedback. I'm just going to check with my team here.
Yeah, Connie, just a couple things to add. So as Connie mentioned, when the clerk of the board releases the agenda for the October 20th meeting, that will be posted on the board's website through their agenda page. But I will note that we will endeavor to turn around as quickly as possible and contact the Fresno River email list. I know some of you may have heard about this meeting through that email list. We will also do our best to notify that list as soon as that information is available publicly, as well as post a link to that agenda item and related items on the Fresno River adjudication website so that you have an easy place to access it. I do also want to note that if you don't wish to participate in the State Water Board meeting, if you don't wish to speak, but if you would like to watch the meeting, you can also do that on the Water Board's website. There's a link to just the live video stream. You do not have to join via the Zoom platform if you don't want to speak.
Excellent, thank you. Rest of the State Water Board team, anything to add?
Not at this point.
Great. So let's open up the floor to the parties. Again, thank you for your patience and working with us, and thank you for minimizing the background noise. That's much appreciated. Jesse's going to help me moderate, but I see Mr. Jensen has his hand up. Mr. Jensen, would you like to unmute yourself?
I'm going to unmute you, Doug.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Jesse?
Yes, I can.
Great. I have a couple of questions. One is with regard to the notices that are being sent out, would those be confined to the area or the owners on the river below the dam, or would this include also the upper river?
This would include the upper river to ensure that we can bring the Bureau of Reclamation into this adjudication. The process has to be comprehensive. So if an adjudication goes forward, it would be comprehensive, and it would include the lower parties as well as upper parties and tributaries.
Second question, you mentioned that there's an opportunity for continued negotiations, but I think that I heard that the staff may, but not will necessarily, consider the results of those negotiations. Can you please clarify the interaction that we might expect with the staff in the event of some successful negotiations?
Speaking hypothetically, because we don't really have an idea what might come out of the negotiations, one way it could work is if there's an agreement that can be rolled into or somehow otherwise incorporated into the order of determination and report of investigation. And what the board would be looking for along those lines is something that it would be able to defend as part of its order of determination.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I do have a third question, if I may. Right now, Madera Irrigation District, which is itself a very significant claimant, is in charge of allocating water. What will happen during this multi-year period of reaching some sort of adjudication? Are you going to recommend that MID continue to be the referee and player? Question mark.
I think at this point, the expectation is that the status quo would continue until an adjudication is complete.
Thank you.
I do not see anybody else having their hand raised. Does anybody have any questions or want to share some initial thoughts with the State Water Board staff? Ms. Lane, can you unmute yourself?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Quick question with regard to the adjudication. Is it going to be, I know Amanda already mentioned that you are going to include the upper river, but is it going to be a full stream adjudication of all water rights, or is it going to be narrowed to what was identified in MID's petition?
It would be a full adjudication. I haven't closely looked at MID's petition recently to see if it encompasses the comprehensive adjudication that we would need to conduct. But the answer is it would be comprehensive and include everything.
Great. Thank you, Amanda.
You're welcome.
And maybe I can just add on one thing. If the board were to grant the petition next month or sometime down the line, one of the first steps that State Water Board staff would take is really plan out the details for this process. As Amanda mentioned earlier, it's been several decades since we last did an adjudication. It had a different scope and scale, we would definitely be looking at scope and timeline for the adjudication. It is certainly our intent that the adjudication would not take as long as the one for San Gregorio Creek did, which was the last one that was conducted. Okay, Mr. McLaughlin. Can you unmute yourself? And I apologize if I mispronounce your name. Right, we have two raised hands up. Mr. McLaughlin. Jesse, can you unmute?
We can't unmute.
Oh, you cannot. Okay, that's right.
But right. We skipped to Brittany while.
Yeah. Brittany, do you want to go?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Is staff going to release some kind of estimate of the cost of the adjudication with its report for the October board meeting?
No, we do not intend to do that. We did put together a very preliminary estimate probably about 1.5 years ago, which we would need to revisit to figure out again the scope and the scale of the potential adjudication. That would be the first step that we would take if the board were to want to move forward with the adjudication. I can tell you, there's a wide range in terms of cost. I think preliminarily, Kearns Invest had asked for that information. I think it could range, I believe we said 3 to 5 million. Jesse, is that right?
Yes, that was our very ballpark rough estimate.
Yeah, again, like Jesse said, it's very ballpark, high level. we on one hand have already done some of that work with the desktop investigation of the lower Fresno. We would have to probably take a similar effort for the upper Fresno. It really largely depends on who all is included in the adjudication, how much information the parties provide to us, how much uncertainty there is. So there's going to be somewhat of an uncertainty until we really get into things and develop a more detailed work plan. Mr. McLaughlin.
Russ, I'm not sure if you've joined us by phone. I'm going to unmute the phone lines and give you a chance in case you're on the phone to speak up. Actually, I cannot unmute the phone lines.
Yes, can you hear me now? This is Russ McLaughlin.
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks.
Jesse, thank you so much. Yes, I was trying to switch computers to be able to speak. I apologize for that. Thanks for taking my question. My question is, in terms of structuring the adjudication, have you given any consideration to coordinating phasing of different segments of the adjudication in concert with potential for further facilitation or mediation of phased subject matters? The reason I ask is I think that might be a productive means of combining both the state board involvement in adjudication together with the opportunity for settling discrete issues under the premise that it was maybe too many pieces and too many things to settle all at once and not knowing exactly where to start that has not yielded success to date and facilitated efforts. Thanks.
Yeah, we did. Sorry, go ahead.
I think we were both waiting for each other to start and then started at the same time.
Yeah.
We have discussed the potential for phasing. We don't have any specific plans. It's certainly something we have kept in mind and something that we anticipate being discussed at the October 20th meeting. Connie, did you have anything to add?
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, it's certainly something that we, again, probably would also consider as we think this through after the board meeting in much more detail and scope this out and how we could best accomplish that. And like Amanda said, we have discussed internally some potential options and given that some consideration.
So to further follow up, that would be an appropriate comment and proposal to make to the board directly. Is that something I should interpret from that?
Yes, absolutely. You are absolutely free to bring this idea to the board for their consideration, and the board may direct staff, you know, to investigate that possibility.
Russ,
Thank
we are
you.
also aware of a comment letter that was received, and that is also an absolutely appropriate way to bring that message forward.
Thank you, Jesse.
And just as a reminder for anybody on the phone, it is *6 to unmute yourself if you are unable to be heard. Seeing that Doug Jensen has another question.
Can you hear me, Jesse?
Yes.
Great. Question, you mentioned preliminary cost estimates and then revisiting those. How would those costs, the state board costs, be allocated among all the parties?
Amanda, do you want to take that one?
Sure. There's an initial fee collection from parties submitting proofs of claim at that phase of the proceedings. It's the proof of claim fees are $1,000 for water rights under 1,000 acre feet, or for riparian claims involving less than 1,000 riparian acres, or $10,000 for larger claims. The costs that are not covered by the proof of claim fees are apportioned towards the end of the process. And the direction is equitable apportionment, but it's difficult to predict exactly what that looks like at this point, because we don't know what will happen during the process if it goes forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Ramos.
Yes, hi. My question is, do you know at this point whether the matters, if granted by the state board, whether it's likely to be assigned to the board for hearing, or might it go to the administrative hearing office or some other venue at this point?
Those options are all on the table. There haven't been any decisions made. It is potentially something that would be referred to the AHO or handled just by the board itself.
Is that likely to be something that's part of staff's recommendation for the 20th, or is that a decision that happens after?
I think that will be a decision that happens after.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't see any other raised hands. Does anybody on the phone have any questions or comments, thoughts? No. Okay. Well, if there are no other thoughts, comments, questions anybody wants to raise, we want to thank you for joining us today. We will be posting the recording on our project website. I would encourage you to visit the website. It has a lot of information, including the district's petition, a fact sheet on the statutory adjudication. As Jesse said earlier, we will be diligent about posting information and getting the notice out as soon as the agenda is posted. We plan to hold another one of these meetings next Monday, so you're welcome to join us again if you think of anything else. Also, a friendly reminder, if you plan to participate in the board meeting and would like to organize as a panel and would like some assistance with that, please feel free to reach out to staff and we'll be happy to assist with the deadlines. If you are participating individually, you can just go ahead and coordinate directly with the clerk of the board. I'm going to do one more last check to see if there's any questions that have popped in your minds or anything you want to share with us. Okay. Well, again, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Feel free to reach out to us through our email addresses, we stay safe, and we will talk to you all later.